The waves slammed into Cedar Bay like angry fists. Ryan Torres gripped his son's hand tighter. "Dad, there's someone out there." Lucas pointed toward the churning black water. A figure thrashed, desperate, drowning. Ryan didn't hesitate. He plunged into the freezing Atlantic, salt water burning his throat. His calloused hands found silk. Expensive silk. He dragged her to shore, blonde hair plastered against porcelain skin, designer clothes clinging to a body that didn't belong in this working-class town. She opened ice-blue eyes. "Thank you." Her voice carried breeding, money, secrets. Ryan peeled off his worn jacket, wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. She stepped back, away from his kindness, away from his help. "I have to go." She melted into the darkness like smoke, leaving only questions and the scent of jasmine mixed with seawater. Why was she here? Why did she run? Ryan Torres had no idea this mysterious woman would shatter his quiet life forever. The next morning brought Lucas's 8-year-old wisdom pressed against the kitchen window. "Dad, what if she was scared of something?" The boy's question hung in the salt air like morning fog. Ryan poured coffee into his favorite mug, the one Lucas had made in art class with uneven handles and crooked letters spelling "World's Best Dad." 3 years had passed since Maria's death. 3 years of learning to be both father and mother to a boy who remembered too much about loss. Lucas watched every stranger with the careful attention of someone who'd learned that people could disappear without warning. The house around them told their story in scratched furniture and family photos, in Lucas's artwork covering the refrigerator and Ryan's tools scattered across every available surface. They'd built something good here, something small but solid. Ryan's carpentry business operated from the converted garage behind their weathered Cape Cod house. The workshop smelled like sawdust and wood stain, filled with projects in various stages of completion. A rocking chair for the Hendersons' new grandbaby. Kitchen cabinets for the Moretti's renovation. Simple work that paid the bills and kept his hands busy during the long evenings after Lucas went to bed. The locals trusted him because he'd grown up here, because they'd watched him grieve his young wife with dignity, because his work lasted. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between hammer strikes, Ryan wondered if this was all there would be. Good work, good neighbors, and the gentle routine of raising Lucas in the same town where he'd been raised. 4 days after the rescue, Ryan found her at Seabreeze Cafe. She sat in the corner booth like someone expecting trouble, designer clothes replaced by jeans and a sweater that looked borrowed. Her blonde hair caught the morning light streaming through salt-stained windows. She held her coffee cup with both hands, staring at the harbor where fishing boats prepared for another day's work. When she saw Ryan approaching, her entire body tensed. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," he said, keeping his distance. Her ice-blue eyes studied his face, as if memorizing every detail. "I'm fine. Thank you for what you did the other night." The words came out carefully measured, like someone who'd practiced polite responses to unwanted attention. Lucas burst through the cafe door carrying his latest wooden boat, the one he'd been sanding in Ryan's workshop. "Dad!" Mrs. Chen said I could bring this to show and tell. He stopped short when he spotted the woman from the beach, his dark eyes widening with recognition. "You're the swimming lady." His 8-year-old directness cut through adult pretense like a sharp knife. The woman's careful mask slipped, revealing something vulnerable underneath. "Hello," she said softly, her voice warming when she spoke to Lucas. "That's a beautiful boat. Did you make it yourself?" Lucas puffed up with pride, launching into detailed explanations about wood grain and proper sanding techniques that made Ryan smile despite the tension crackling in the air. "I'm Alexis," she said when Lucas paused for breath. The name sounded chosen rather than given, like she'd considered other options before settling on this one. Ryan introduced himself and Lucas, watching as she repeated their names silently. "Are you visiting Cedar Bay?" Lucas asked with childhood's fearless curiosity. Alexis hesitated, fingers tightening around her mug. "I'm staying for a while. Taking some time to figure things out." The phrase carried weight, suggesting complications that went deeper than a simple vacation. Ryan noticed the expensive watch on her wrist, the subtle designer details that spoke of serious money, the way she held herself like someone accustomed to boardrooms and charity galas. Over the following days, Alexis became part of their afternoon routine on the beach. She taught Lucas about wind patterns and tidal currents with the precision of someone who understood maritime science. Her hands moved confidently as she adjusted the sail on Lucas's toy boat, explaining complex concepts with patience that suggested genuine teaching experience. Lucas absorbed every word, his natural curiosity finding a willing instructor in this mysterious woman who seemed to speak the language of wind and water fluently. Ryan watched these interactions with growing fascination, noting how Alexis's guarded expression softened whenever Lucas asked questions or shared his 8-year-old theories about boat design. But Ryan also noticed troubling details. Alexis's phone buzzed constantly with calls she never answered in their presence. She would glance at the screen, and her face would tighten with worry or fear before excusing herself for hushed conversations that left her looking smaller and more frightened. "Everything okay?" Ryan asked one afternoon when she'd been gone longer than usual. "Family stuff," she replied, but her smile felt forced. "Nothing I can't handle." The words rang hollow, carrying the same tone Ryan had used in the months after Maria's diagnosis, when neighbors asked how he was holding up, and he wasn't ready to admit his world was crumbling. The third week brought the first real signs of trouble. Charlie Morrison, Cedar Bay's unofficial news network, approached Ryan while he was replacing deck boards on the Andersons' porch. "Strange folks been asking questions around town," Charlie said, his weathered face creased with concern. "City types in expensive suits, flashing pictures and offering money for information about newcomers." Ryan's hammer paused mid-swing, ice forming in his stomach. "What kind of pictures?" Charlie shrugged, but his expression remained troubled. "Didn't get a good look, but they seemed mighty interested in anyone who might have arrived recently." Got folks nervous, offering cash for gossip like that. That evening, Ryan found Alexis at the abandoned lighthouse, sitting on familiar rocks where they'd talked before. The old structure commanded a sweeping view of the coastline, its peeling paint and boarded windows speaking of better days long past. She looked smaller against the vast expanse of sea and sky, her expensive clothes incongruous with weathered stone and rusted iron. "Heard there might be people looking for you," Ryan said quietly, settling beside her. Alexis didn't seem surprised, just tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "How many people know I'm here?" she asked. "In a town this size, everyone knows about everyone." Her laugh held no humor, only bitter recognition of small-town reality. "What kind of trouble are you running from?" The question bridged the space between them, offering her a choice between truth and continued deception. For long moments, only waves against rocks and distant seagull cries filled the silence. "The kind that follows you no matter how far you run." she finally said. The kind that ruins everything good you try to build. She turned to face him, and Ryan saw fear in those ice-blue eyes, but also desperate hope that maybe she'd found somewhere the trouble couldn't reach. My family has expectations, plans for my life that don't include what I want. The words emerged carefully, like she'd practiced this explanation but never felt safe enough to use it. 2 days later, the black sedan arrived. Ryan was teaching Lucas proper chisel technique in the workshop when he heard the unfamiliar engine note, too smooth and expensive for Cedar Bay's usual traffic. Through the dusty window, he watched 2 men in dark suits emerge from the vehicle, their movements precise and professional. They surveyed the Torres property with systematic attention, the older man consulting what appeared to be photographs on a tablet. Lucas pressed against Ryan's side, sensing danger even without understanding its source. "Who are those men, Dad?" The whispered question carried the fear of a child who'd already lost too much. Ryan kept his voice steady despite the ice forming in his chest. "I don't know yet, son." The knock came exactly 3 minutes later, measured and authoritative. Ryan opened the door to find the older man extending an embossed business card. Harold Morrison, attorney at law, Boston address suggesting serious money behind his practice. "Mr. Torres, I apologize for the intrusion. I'm searching for someone who may have sought shelter in your community." Morrison's voice carried courtroom polish, but his eyes held predatory calculation. He produced a photograph from his jacket. Alexis, but not the Alexis Ryan knew. This version wore clothes that cost more than Ryan's truck, stood on a yacht's deck with the practiced smile of inherited wealth, surrounded by people but somehow utterly alone. "Her name is Alexis Sterling," Morrison continued, watching Ryan's face for recognition. "Her family is extremely concerned about her well-being." Ryan studied the photograph, his carpenter's eye noting details Morrison probably hoped he'd miss. The way Alexis's smile never reached her eyes, the subtle tension in her posture, the fact that she looked like a beautiful prisoner in an expensive cage. "Sterling," Ryan repeated, the name triggering memory. "As in Sterling Maritime?" Morrison's smile sharpened like a blade. "You're familiar with the company. Then you understand the resources at our disposal and the importance of locating Miss Sterling quickly." The threat wrapped in silk was still a threat. "She's not well," Morrison continued, his voice dropping to confidential tones. "The family believes she's having another episode. She requires medical attention that can only be provided at home." The words, "another episode," hit Ryan like cold water, suggesting either serious mental illness or systematic gaslighting. "If she's sick, shouldn't you involve local authorities?" Morrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Miss Sterling can be resistant to help when she's in this state. Her family prefers handling these matters privately." His gaze moved past Ryan, cataloguing the modest furnishings visible through the doorway. Of course, anyone assisting in a safe return would find the Sterling family very grateful, financially speaking. That night, after Lucas had fallen asleep, Ryan sat on his front porch, watching fog roll in from the Atlantic. The conversation with Morrison played on repeat, each detail taking on new significance in the darkness. Either Alexis was a wealthy woman having a mental health crisis, or she was someone fleeing a family that used lawyers like weapons and money like chains. Both possibilities led to the same dangerous conclusion. Lucas could get caught in whatever crossfire was coming. Ryan's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Playground tomorrow? 10 a.m. Come alone." He recognized Alexis's careful phrasing, the way she never quite said what she meant. The message felt like goodbye. The playground sat empty in morning mist, swings moving slightly in ocean breeze like ghosts of absent children. Alexis emerged from behind the maintenance shed, her expensive clothes replaced by borrowed jeans and sweater that made her look younger, more vulnerable, but somehow more real. "They found me," she said without preamble, settling onto one of the swings. "I saw the car yesterday, talked to some locals. It won't be long now." She began swinging gently, the motion seeming to calm her enough to speak freely. "I want you to know that nothing about this situation is what it seems." Ryan took the neighboring swing, chains creaking under his weight. "Morrison says you're sick. Says your family's worried." Alexis's laugh sounded like breaking glass. "Worried about their investment, maybe. About their carefully constructed plans." She dragged her feet in sand beneath the swing, stopping the motion to look directly at Ryan. "My full name is Alexis Sterling. My father is William Sterling of Sterling Maritime. Maybe you've heard of us." Ryan had indeed heard of them, one of the largest shipping companies on the East Coast, with contracts spanning continents. "My father built that empire from nothing, and he expects me to inherit his crown. Problem is, I never wanted to rule a shipping kingdom. I wanted to design boats, not just own them." The pieces began falling into place as Alexis continued her story, her knowledge of maritime engineering, her confidence around water, the expensive clothes that seemed like costumes she'd rather not wear. "So you ran away," Ryan said, and it wasn't a question. "I tried compromise first," she replied. "Asked if I could start a design division within the company, focus on custom yachts and innovative vessels." My father's response was arranging my engagement to Jonathan Reed, son of our biggest competitor, a merger disguised as matrimony. Her voice carried bitter recognition of being treated like a commodity rather than a daughter. When I refused, they had me evaluated by psychiatrists. Apparently, any woman who won't marry for business reasons must be mentally unstable. Ryan felt protective anger building in his chest, hot and immediate. "They can't force you to marry someone you don't love." Alexis's smile held no warmth, only weary knowledge. "They can if they control your trust fund, your inheritance, and convince courts that you're incompetent to make decisions. The Sterling family employs the best lawyers money can buy." She stood from the swing, pacing toward the ocean where Lucas had first spotted her, struggling in dark water. "So I disappeared. Emptied accessible accounts, sold jewelry, and started running. 2 months of moving from town to town, staying ahead of their search efforts." She turned back to face him. Cedar Bay was supposed to be another temporary stop, somewhere to hide while planning my next move. Before Ryan could respond, his phone rang. Lucas's school, Principal Anderson's voice tight with controlled anger. "Mr. Torres, Lucas is fine, but you need to come immediately. There are men here asking questions about your family, and they're making everyone uncomfortable." Ryan's blood turned to ice water. What kind of questions? The principal's fury barely contained itself. They claim to be conducting background checks for employment purposes, but they're asking about Lucas specifically. His routines, his activities, whether he mentions new people in your lives. I've asked them to leave, but they insist they have legal authority. Ryan was already moving toward his truck. "Tell them nothing. I'll be there in 8 minutes." The drive to Cedar Bay Elementary pushed Ryan's battered pickup harder than ever before. The school parking lot contained Morrison's sedan, plus a second vehicle with Massachusetts plates, their presence like an infection in familiar surroundings. Through the principal's office window, Ryan could see Morrison conferring with a younger man who radiated the same predatory stillness. Lucas sat outside the office, his small face pinched with worry until he spotted his father through the glass. Relief flooded the boy's features as Ryan knelt to check for signs of distress or harm. "Did they talk to you directly?" Lucas shook his head. "Principal Anderson said I should wait out here while the grown-ups discussed things." Principal Anderson emerged from her office, looking like she'd been wrestling with sharks and losing. "Mr. Torres, these gentlemen claim to be investigating potential safety concerns involving someone in our community. They won't provide specifics, but they seem very interested in your family's recent social connections." Morrison appeared behind her, his smile as sharp as ever. "Mr. Torres, I was hoping we could continue our conversation from yesterday. Perhaps we could speak privately this afternoon. I have new information that might change your perspective on Miss Sterling's situation." Ryan stood slowly, placing himself between Morrison and Lucas like a human shield. "Any conversation you want happens away from my son and his school." Morrison nodded, as if this were perfectly reasonable. "Of course. Family first, I completely understand." The drive home passed in tense silence, Lucas sensing that adult complications had invaded their simple world without permission. Ryan's mind raced through possibilities, none of them offering comfort. If the Sterling family was willing to involve Lucas, they were playing a much more serious game than he'd initially understood. At home, he made Lucas's favorite lunch, while his son chattered nervously about school projects and boat designs, anything except the men who'd been asking questions. "Dad, is the swimming lady in trouble?" Lucas finally asked, his directness cutting through pretense like a sharp blade. "I think so, son." But not trouble she caused, the kind that found her instead. That afternoon brought Morrison's return, this time alone, and carrying a leather briefcase that suggested serious business negotiations. He sat at Ryan's kitchen table as if he belonged there, declining offered coffee with practiced politeness that felt more threatening than outright hostility. "Mr. Torres, I want complete honesty about Miss Sterling's condition." Morrison opened his case and withdrew a thick manila folder. "These are psychiatric evaluations, medical records, and incident reports dating back 5 years. Alexis Sterling has documented history of unstable behavior, including a suicide attempt requiring hospitalization." The folder landed on Ryan's table with finality. "Her family loves her deeply, but they can't provide help she won't accept." Ryan stared at the unopened folder, his carpenter's instincts warning about gifts that came with hidden costs and unexpected consequences. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Morrison leaned back in his chair, the gesture calculated to appear reasonable and unthreatening. "Simply contact us when you see her next. Don't attempt to detain her or influence her decisions. Just provide location information so we can dispatch appropriate medical personnel to ensure her safety." He paused, allowing the reasonableness of the request to settle like dust. "The Sterling family would compensate you generously for this assistance, enough to secure Lucas's college education, perhaps purchase expanded workshop space, establish long-term financial stability for both of you. And if I refuse—" Morrison's smile never wavered, but his eyes grew colder. "Then Miss Sterling continues deteriorating without proper medical care, potentially putting herself and others at risk. Her episodes can be quite unpredictable, particularly around children." The lawyer's gaze flicked meaningfully towards the stairs where Lucas was presumably doing homework. Youngsters who've already experienced significant loss can be especially vulnerable to adult instability and inappropriate emotional attachment. The threat was delivered with surgical precision, wrapped in concern, but sharp enough to draw blood. Ryan felt his hands clench beneath the table. "You're suggesting my son is in danger?" Morrison spread his hands in a gesture of apparent regret. "I'm suggesting that mentally unstable individuals often form unhealthy attachments, particularly to families that represent what they've lost." After Morrison left, Ryan sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at the unopened folder like it might contain either salvation or damnation. Rain had begun falling, drumming against windows with increasing urgency that matched his growing anxiety. Upstairs, Lucas practiced piano with halting notes of a melody Maria had started teaching before illness made her too weak to continue. The sound carried memories of simpler times when their biggest concern was whether Lucas would remember to practice scales consistently. Now Ryan faced a choice that could destroy everything they'd rebuilt: trust a woman he'd known 3 weeks, or protect his son by betraying someone who might genuinely need help. His phone buzzed with another text from Alexis. "They reached you. I understand completely. Thank you for everything you've done." The message felt like farewell, and Ryan realized that understanding and acceptance weren't the same thing at all. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door, calling up to Lucas. "I'll be back within the hour, son. Keep doors locked and don't answer for anyone." The boy's voice drifted down the staircase. "Is everything okay, Dad?" Ryan paused at the bottom step, one hand on the banister he'd sanded and stained himself during better times. "I'm working on making sure it will be—" The words felt like a promise he wasn't certain he could keep. The lighthouse stood silhouetted against storm clouds, its broken windows and peeling paint making it look like a monument to abandoned dreams and faded hopes. Ryan found Alexis in their usual spot, but now she had a small suitcase beside her and the defeated posture of someone who'd finally run out of places to run. "You came," she said without looking at him. "I wasn't sure you would after Morrison's visit with his medical records and financial offers." Ryan settled beside her on wet stone, rain soaking through his jacket to chill his skin. He left interesting reading material, psychiatric evaluations, suicide attempts. "Want to tell me your side before I decide what to believe?" Alexis was quiet so long that Ryan thought she might not answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice carried exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting the same battle for years without winning. "Have you ever been diagnosed with something you don't actually have? Had your reality questioned by people who profit from your compliance?" She picked up a broken shell, turning it over in fingers that trembled slightly. 5 years ago, I refused to join the family business immediately after college graduation. I wanted to work for other companies first, learn different approaches to marine engineering and naval architecture. My father interpreted this as rebellion against family loyalty. The shell crumbled in her grip as she continued. When I started dating someone he didn't approve of, a professor who wasn't wealthy enough for sterling standards, my father decided I was making poor life decisions due to emotional instability. 3 psychiatric evaluations later, I was diagnosed with everything from bipolar disorder to borderline personality disorder, depending on which doctor received the largest consulting fee. She looked at Ryan directly for the first time since he'd arrived. "The suicide attempt Morrison mentioned. I took sleeping pills after my father had my boyfriend fired and blacklisted from every marine engineering firm on the East Coast. I wanted to sleep for a week and forget what my family was capable of doing to people I cared about. Ryan watched her face as she spoke, noting how her hands shook with anger rather than illness, how her eyes held the clarity of someone telling truth rather than the confusion of mental instability. Instead of sleeping, I woke up in a psychiatric ward with permanent notations in my medical records. I spent 6 months in treatment, not because I was genuinely sick, but because refusing treatment would have proven I was delusional about my own mental state. Every therapy session, every medication adjustment, every group meeting was designed to make me accept that my father knew what was best for my life better than I did. The pieces of Morrison's visit took on completely different meaning as Alexis continued her story. The psychiatric records were real, but they painted a picture of systematic manipulation rather than mental illness. The family's concern was genuine too, but it stemmed from financial and social considerations rather than love or genuine worry about her well-being. "So you planned your escape?" Ryan said, and it wasn't a question but recognition. "I planned for 2 years." Alexis confirmed. Slowly liquidating assets my father couldn't directly control, establishing alternative identities, learning how to disappear without leaving digital footprints or paper trails that could be followed. The night I left, I was supposed to attend my engagement party with Jonathan Reed. Instead, I drove to the harbor and watched my father's favorite yacht burn to the waterline. Ryan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You burned his yacht?" Alexis's smile was the first genuine one he'd seen from her since this conversation began. "Insurance fire, electrical malfunction in the engine compartment. Tragically expensive accident." The admission revealed calculating intelligence that Morrison's medical folder had conveniently omitted from its narrative of mental instability. Before Ryan could respond to this revelation, headlights swept across the lighthouse grounds in systematic patterns. Not Morrison's smooth Mercedes this time, but heavier vehicles with the rumbling engines of serious machinery. Alexis was on her feet instantly, suitcase handle gripped in white knuckles. They brought backup this time. Through sheets of rain, Ryan could see at least 3 vehicles, disgorging men in dark clothing who moved with military precision. Not lawyers or medical personnel, security contractors, possibly worse. "There's a path down to the water," Alexis said, already moving towards the cliff edge. "If you go now, you can get back to Lucas before they realize you were here with me." But Ryan was thinking about his son's question earlier. Are we going to help her? And about what kind of man he wanted Lucas to become through his example. "My truck's faster than any footpath," he said, grabbing her free hand. "And I know these roads better than any outsiders ever will." The next 20 minutes redefined Ryan's understanding of what fear actually felt like in practice. His pickup truck, designed for hauling lumber rather than outrunning professional pursuit, labored up winding coastal roads while headlights gained steadily in his rearview mirror. Alexis sat rigid in the passenger seat, one hand braced against the dashboard, the other clutching her suitcase like a lifeline to some uncertain future. "There's a ferry to Bar Harbor," she said between jolts as the truck hit another pothole at dangerous speed. "If I can reach the mainland, I have contacts who can help me disappear more permanently." Ryan took a corner faster than physics recommended, feeling rear wheels slide on wet pavement before regaining traction. What happens after that? How long can you keep running from people with unlimited resources? The question hung between them as another set of headlights appeared behind their original pursuers, suggesting the Sterling family's reach extended further than either of them had imagined. The ferry dock appeared through sheets of rain like salvation wrapped in rusted metal and weathered wood, a few scattered lights indicating that the last boat of the evening was preparing for departure. Ryan pulled up to the boarding area just as the terminal worker began unhooking the safety chain. "Wait!" Alexis called, jumping from the truck before it fully stopped. "I need passage to Bar Harbor immediately!" The worker, a weathered man in his 60s, looked skeptical about last-minute passengers during worsening weather conditions. "Storm's getting worse by the minute. Captain's talking about cancelling the run entirely." Behind them, pursuing vehicles had crested the hill, their headlights washing over the dock area like searchlights hunting escaped prisoners. Alexis pulled out a roll of cash that made the worker's eyes widen considerably. "Please, it's a genuine emergency." The man pocketed the money and waved them toward the boarding ramp. "Make it quick then. We're casting off right now whether you're ready or not." Ryan should have stayed behind, should have returned home to Lucas and the safe predictability of their quiet life together. Instead, he found himself running up the ferry's boarding ramp, his feet making choices his rational mind was still debating. "Ryan, no," Alexis protested as he reached the deck beside her. "You can't leave Lucas alone like this. Go back to him where you belong." But the ramp was already being raised, the ferry's engines thrumming to life beneath their feet with mechanical determination. Through driving rain, Ryan could see Morrison and his associates reaching the dock just as the boat pulled away from shore, leaving them standing in the downpour looking like drowned predators who'd lost their prey. The lawyer's face was illuminated by flashing lights as local police finally responded to reports of suspicious activity and potential harassment. On the ferry's small passenger cabin, Ryan called Mrs. Patterson, Lucas's former teacher and longtime family friend who'd helped them through Maria's illness and death. "Emergency babysitting situation," he explained over a connection crackling with static from the storm. "I'll be back tomorrow morning, but Lucas can't be alone tonight with everything that's happening." Mrs. Patterson, blessed woman, asked no questions beyond practical ones about pajamas and breakfast preferences, and whether she should call if problems arose. "You're a good man, Ryan Torres," she said before hanging up. "Maria would be proud of the choices you're making." The words carried both comfort and weight. Alexis stood at the ferry's stern, watching Cedar Bay's lights fade into rain and darkness like memories dissolving into time. "I'm sorry," she said when Ryan joined her at the railing. "I never meant for you to get involved like this. Never intended for Lucas to be threatened or used as leverage against you." The wind whipped her hair across her face, and for the first time since he'd pulled her from the water, she looked truly lost rather than just temporarily displaced. "What happens now?" Ryan asked, raising his voice over engine noise and weather. "I have a friend in Boston, someone from MIT who understood why I left the program early. She's been helping people disappear from complicated family situations. New identities, safe houses, legal protection for people whose families have too much money and not enough conscience." Alexis continued, gripping the railing as the ferry rode another large wave. "But it means giving up everything permanently. Never contacting anyone from my old life again. Never." She didn't finish the sentence. But Ryan understood the unspoken words. Never seeing him or Lucas again, never building on whatever connection had been growing between them, never discovering what might have developed given time and circumstances. The ferry ride to Bar Harbor took 2 hours. 2 hours during which Ryan learned more about Alexis Sterling than Morrison's folder could have revealed. She told him about her mother, who died in a sailing accident when Alexis was 12, leaving her alone with a father who saw business opportunities where others saw tragedy and loss. About her struggles at MIT, brilliant but isolated, the only woman in most classes, and certainly the only one whose trust fund made her a target for fortune hunters and academic gold diggers alike. About professors who dismissed her ideas because of her gender and others who supported her work because of her family's money, neither group seeing her for who she actually was beneath the surface. "I wanted to design boats that could weather any storm imaginable," she said, watching waves crash against the ferry's hull with methodical violence. "Turns out I should have been designing a life that could do the same thing instead." Boston's skyline emerged from dawn mist like a promise or threat, depending on perspective and circumstance. Ryan had visited the city exactly twice, both times for medical consultations during Maria's illness, and it felt like entering foreign territory where his carpentry skills and small-town instincts might prove inadequate for whatever challenges lay ahead. Sarah Hendricks lived in a converted brownstone that managed to appear both elegant and fortress-like, architectural contradictions that somehow worked together. She answered the door before they could knock. A woman in her 40s with prematurely grey hair and eyes that missed nothing important. "Alex," she said, using a nickname Ryan hadn't heard before. "You look terrible, even worse than I expected. And you must be the carpenter who's been causing all the excitement." She stepped aside to allow them entry. "I've been tracking Sterling maritime search efforts since you disappeared, honey. When they started focusing on coastal Maine, I figured you'd found something worth staying for." Sarah's living room doubled as a command center, filled with multiple computers, secure communication equipment, and walls covered with documentation that spoke of other people who'd needed to disappear from their own lives. "Your father's escalated beyond what we anticipated," she told Alexis without preamble or gentle introduction. "He's filed papers to have you declared mentally incompetent and placed under legal conservatorship. Morrison isn't just any lawyer. He specializes in family law cases involving contested estates and reluctant heirs." She handed Alexis a thick legal document that seemed to weigh more than paper should. "This was filed yesterday in Suffolk County. If it succeeds, William Sterling gains legal control over your medical decisions, financial assets, and personal relationships." The implications hit Ryan like ice water, suddenly making sense of Morrison's aggressive tactics and willingness to involve Lucas in their pressure campaign. Not only could they force Alexis into treatment she didn't need, they could legally prevent her from seeing anyone they deemed unsuitable or harmful to her well-being, including him and Lucas, including anyone who might support her independence or validate her version of events. But Sarah wasn't finished delivering devastating news about their situation. "There's more you need to know," Sarah continued, producing another folder that made Ryan's stomach clench with dread. "They've hired a private investigation firm to build a comprehensive case against you, Ryan. They're claiming you're exploiting a vulnerable woman for financial gain, using classic predatory tactics." She opened the folder to reveal photographs that made Ryan feel sick. Pictures of him and Alexis on the beach, digitally enhanced to appear more intimate than they actually were. Pictures of Lucas, with detailed notes about his mother's death and Ryan's financial struggles. Pictures of their house, with estimated property values and mortgage information that should have been private. They're constructing a narrative where you identified a wealthy target, manipulated her emotional state during a vulnerable period, and exploited her psychological instability for personal benefit. Sarah explained, her voice carrying professional anger at the tactics being employed. It's character assassination designed to undermine any testimony you might provide in Alexis's defense, and to justify removing her from your harmful influence for her own protection. Ryan sank into one of Sarah's chairs, finally understanding the full scope of resources the Sterling family could bring to bear against anyone who threatened their control. The next several hours passed in intensive legal consultation and strategic planning that felt more like preparing for war than resolving a family dispute. Sarah had contacts throughout New England, lawyers who specialized in fighting conservatorship cases, safe houses where people could stay while building new identities. Even a judge who'd grown tired of seeing wealthy families abuse the court system to control adult children. "We can fight this," she concluded after reviewing all documentation. "But it means going completely public with everything. Media attention, legal battles that could drag on for years, and no guarantees of success." She looked directly at Ryan. "And it means you'll be in the center of it all. They'll investigate every aspect of your life, Lucas's life, looking for anything they can use as ammunition." Before Ryan could respond to this daunting prospect, his phone rang with Mrs. Patterson's number displayed. "Ryan, thank goodness you answered. Lucas is fine, but there are people here claiming to be from social services, conducting a welfare check based on an anonymous report about child neglect." Ryan's blood turned to ice as Sarah's predictions proved accurate with terrifying speed. "What kind of report?" Mrs. Patterson's voice carried barely controlled fury. "Allegations that you've been leaving Lucas with inappropriate supervision while pursuing romantic relationships with mentally unstable individuals. It's completely ridiculous, but they have official paperwork and want to interview Lucas directly." The Sterling family's tentacles reached further than Ryan had imagined possible, and they weren't limiting their attacks to Alexis alone. They were using Lucas as leverage, knowing that any threat to his son would force Ryan to abandon Alexis to protect the child he'd raised alone for 3 years. Sarah was already moving before Ryan finished the call, grabbing legal documents from multiple files with practiced efficiency. "Emergency custody protection orders," she explained, shoving papers into her briefcase. "If they're moving on Lucas, we have maybe hours before they escalate to temporary removal proceedings based on manufactured evidence." "This is your father's endgame," Sarah told Alexis while gathering resources for immediate legal action. "He can't control you directly anymore, so he's attacking what you care about most. Force Ryan to choose between protecting his son and protecting you, isolating you from the one source of genuine support that gave you reason to stop running." The calculation was brilliant in its ruthlessness, designed to destroy the relationship that threatened William Sterling's control over his daughter's life and choices. "There's a way to stop this," Sarah continued, "but it requires something none of us have discussed yet." The solution she proposed was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications for everyone involved. William Sterling's entire legal strategy depends on painting Alexis as mentally incompetent and Ryan as an exploitative opportunist taking advantage of her vulnerability. But if they were married, the entire battlefield changes completely. She let the suggestion hang unfinished in charged air. Married people can't be compelled to testify against each other. More importantly, a husband has legal standing to challenge medical commitments and conservatorship orders. Ryan stared at her in disbelief. "You're suggesting we get married today, to someone I've known for 3 weeks, to fight a legal battle against people with unlimited resources?" Sarah's smile carried sharp edges. "I'm suggesting you form a strategic alliance that happens to involve legal matrimony. The marriage doesn't have to be emotionally real. It just needs to be legally binding and properly documented." Alexis was quiet for a long moment, staring out Sora's window at Boston traffic moving through streets that suddenly felt like foreign territory. When Alexis finally spoke, Her voice carried the weight of someone making a decision that would change everything permanently. "It's not fair to ask that of you, Ryan. Marriage should mean something more than legal convenience or tactical necessity." But even as she voiced objections, Ryan could see her considering possibilities beyond mere survival. Not just protection for herself, but protection for Lucas, an end to the running and hiding that had defined her existence for months. What if it meant something more than convenience? Ryan asked quietly, surprising himself as much as her with the question. What if we tried to make it real? He'd known this woman less than a month, but she'd already changed how Lucas laughed, how their house felt, how Ryan thought about possibilities beyond simple survival. Sarah's courthouse contact managed to expedite marriage license processing, calling in favors that spoke of other desperate people who'd needed legal protection quickly. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Ryan Torres and Alexis Sterling stood in a judge's chambers overlooking Boston Harbor, exchanging vows that were equal parts legal necessity and leap of faith into an uncertain future. Lucas participated via video call from Mrs. Patterson's kitchen, his 8-year-old face beaming as he watched his father marry the boat lady who taught him about wind patterns and proper sail design. "Does this mean she's my mum now?" Lucas asked with childhood's directness, cutting through adult complications to essential questions. Ryan and Alexis exchanged glances, both understanding that the question had no simple answer, but required honest response nonetheless. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes, but the paperwork that followed stretched into evening hours. Legal notifications that had to be filed immediately, press statements that Sarah's media contacts would release to sympathetic journalists, emergency motions challenging every aspect of the Sterling family's legal strategy before it could gain momentum. "Speed is crucial now," Sarah explained while coordinating what felt like a small war fought with documents instead of weapons. "By the time William Sterling realizes what's happened, the legal landscape will have changed completely. He'll have to start over, and this time he'll be fighting not just his daughter, but his daughter's husband." The drive back to Maine took place in darkness, Ryan and Alexis navigating unfamiliar roads while processing the strange, new reality of being married to someone they were still learning to know. "Regrets yet?" Alexis asked as they crossed the New Hampshire border into territory that felt slightly more like home. "Ask me in a year," Ryan replied. But he was thinking about Lucas's smile during the video ceremony, about how Alexis had looked when saying her vows. Not like someone going through legal motions, but like someone choosing hope over fear for the first time in years. Cedar Bay looked different when they arrived near midnight, smaller somehow, but also more precious, like a place worth fighting for rather than simply a place to hide. Mrs. Patterson met them at the door with Lucas sleeping in her arms, the 8-year-old having fought exhaustion while waiting for their return. "Social services left around dinner time," she whispered as Ryan took his son. "I told them they'd need proper warrants if they wanted to conduct any interviews with Lucas." Seemed to discourage them considerably, especially when I mentioned calling my nephew who works for the State Attorney General's office. The next morning brought William Sterling himself, arriving not with lawyers or investigators, but alone, driving a modest rental car that looked out of place in the Torres driveway. Ryan watched from the kitchen window as the man who'd tried to destroy his life sat in the vehicle for several minutes, staring at the house where his daughter had chosen to build something new. When Sterling finally approached the door, he moved like someone carrying an unexpectedly heavy burden. "Mr. Torres," he said when Ryan answered his knock, "I believe congratulations are in order." His voice carried exhaustion rather than anger. "May I speak with my daughter?" Alexis emerged from the workshop behind the house, her hair pulled back and hands stained with wood polish from helping Ryan restore an antique sea chest. She looked different than in Morrison's photographs, less polished but more grounded, wearing work clothes instead of designer outfits, but somehow more herself than she'd ever appeared in her father's carefully constructed world. "Hello, Father," she said quietly, her voice steady but cautious. "I heard you drove up from Boston personally this time." William Sterling studied his daughter's face, as if seeing her clearly for the first time in years. "You look settled," he said finally, the observation seeming to surprise him. "Happy even. Is this really what you want? This life you've chosen?" Alexis glanced toward the workshop, where Lucas was learning to sand curved surfaces, toward the house that smelled like coffee and morning conversations, toward Ryan, who stood ready to support whatever decision she made about her future. "I want to design boats that matter," Alexis said simply, her words carrying years of suppressed dreams. "I want to wake up excited about my work instead of dreading another day of meetings about profit margins and market expansion strategies. I want to be valued for what I contribute rather than what I'm worth in terms of inheritance or business connections." She paused, choosing words carefully. "I want to be part of something I'm building rather than something I inherited from previous generations." William Sterling was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between his daughter and the modest surroundings she'd chosen over his empire. "The conservatorship papers," he said finally, his voice carrying what sounded like genuine regret. "Morrison filed them without my direct authorization. I've had them withdrawn permanently." The admission seemed to age him visibly. "I thought I was protecting you from making mistakes. I thought I knew what would make you happy better than you did." His voice cracked slightly. "I thought I could force you to accept the life I'd built for you." What followed was the first genuine conversation between father and daughter that either could remember in recent years. Not negotiation or argument, but an attempt to understand how love had been twisted into control, how protection had become imprisonment. "Your mother would have understood this choice," William admitted as they sat on the Torres' front porch, watching Lucas demonstrate sailing principles with increasingly elaborate hand gestures. "She gave up everything to marry me, her family's shipbuilding business, her friends, her entire life in Mystic. I used to think I'd won her over with charm and persistence. Now I realize she was choosing freedom over other people's expectations, exactly like you're doing." The compromise they reached that afternoon would have seemed impossible just days earlier. Sterling Maritime would establish a custom design division with Alexis as its head, and complete autonomy over projects and personnel. She would maintain her inheritance but also her independence, working from a satellite office that could be located anywhere she chose, including a small coastal town in Maine where she'd learned what happiness actually felt like. "I'll still need to travel sometimes for board meetings and client presentations," she told Ryan as they worked out details. But this would be home. The word carried weight, they all understood, encompassing not just a place, but the people who made that place matter. 6 months later, Cedar Bay had acquired something unprecedented, a satellite office of one of the country's largest maritime companies, housed in a converted warehouse near the harbor, where fishing boats shared space with custom yachts. The Sterling Maritime Custom Design Division employed 15 local people, from naval architects to master craftsmen, all dedicated to creating vessels that combined traditional craftsmanship with innovative engineering. Ryan's carpentry business had evolved into something larger but still personal, specializing in bespoke interiors that turned floating machines into floating homes. Lucas had developed an uncanny ability to spot design flaws in boat plans, his 8-year-old perspective unconstrained by conventional thinking or adult assumptions about what was possible. Alexis taught evening classes at the community center, sharing her knowledge with local fishermen who wanted to build better boats and retirees who dreamed of sailing into their golden years with vessels designed for their specific needs. The sound of her pencil sketching new designs had become as familiar as Lucas's piano practice, both of them creating something new from raw possibility. On a clear morning in January, exactly 1 year after their courthouse wedding, Ryan woke to find Alexis at the bedroom window, watching the harbor where their first collaborative yacht was taking shape. 40 feet of classical lines combined with modern materials, built for a client who wanted to sail around the world with his grandchildren. "Regrets yet?" she asked, echoing their conversation from the dark drive back from Boston. "Ask me in another year," Ryan replied, but they both knew the answer had evolved somewhere between that desperate night and this quiet morning when the future felt infinite with possibility rather than limited by fear. The waves of Cedar Bay continued their eternal rhythm outside their windows, carrying away old sorrows and bringing new possibilities with each tide. While in the small house overlooking the water, a family assembled from the wreckage of other people's plans made quiet promises about tomorrow,